This is BoneChat 86, and we sort of bubbled up a thought experiment. Uh, it's been a lot of different people that have said we've got all these joint preservation, spine preservation, I don't know, sports medicine, soft tissue preservation technologies in these small companies that are having a hard time seeing the light of day because of resources, because the big companies own access, because the regulatory pathway, because they don't have enough funding, whatever. Why can't all these small companies glob together and create a consortium and compete against the big guys? So I'd like to take us through, I don't know if you can see on my screen, I kind of have a agenda. Um, why don't we, this topic, we could go for hours on this, but I'm trying to control it to 1 hour. So let's talk about the problem and opportunity of the lack of preservation technologies on the market. And let's talk about a potential roll-up business model. I call it JointSave. It's just a placeholder. What would that look like? And then let's talk about execution next steps. How could someone package this together, sell it to a private equity group and kick it off? So does that sound like a good place to start, everybody? Yeah, yeah.
Yes, it does.
All right. So who can articulate the problem that's out there today? There's a lot of people on the call have been involved in kind of joint preservation. We had Brad on last week. He articulated very, very well. How a lot of people get total hips prematurely and in their 35 to 60 age range, and they don't need a total hip. There's other technologies that can delay it. And he's working on a great one. So I wrote this article, and let me share that if I can. So I'd like for somebody to sort of kick off the discussion here. What's the problem that we're trying to solve? What's the opportunity? You want to take it, Brad? Just
Yeah, I talked a lot last week, but I'm happy to take the mic again
yeah.
and start the conversation for
Set us
sure.
up. Yeah.
Yeah, we run into this all the time, and I'm sure anybody in this space, can comment on this too. It's, I was actually talking to a 29-year-old this morning who needs a total hip replacement, and he's just had some really bad treatments in his past, and he's just in this bad situation where he needs a hip replacement, but he's too young for one, but he's in kind of no man's land too. He doesn't have a good option right now. And it seems like people that are trying to provide solutions for that patient population are just facing enormous struggles to get funding. And I can speak from our perspective. I mean, we've been trying to get funding for years and to raise some real capital and put some real fuel in the car to go faster. And we just haven't been able to do it. People say that's interesting, but it's ortho med tech, and we're just not interested in a PMA path product for too much risk, too many regulatory hurdles, and too long for an ROI. So we're just going to check out there. So what we've done is we've bootstrapped the idea through grant funding, and we've been successful doing that, but it's a slow way to do it. And I'm still struggling every day. Where are we going to get the capital to get this to the finish line or get enough data in the door to show somebody it's worth investing in? So this is a topic near and dear to my heart and everything that we're trying to do at Cytex Ortho, but I'd love to hear other perspectives on it too.
One thing I'd like to add, this is not necessarily something that just delays a total joint for somebody. If you can catch the disease early enough, you can probably reverse it. So I think we should look at it both ways. Here's something that if a person is too young to receive a joint or other therapy, that we could delay that long enough for them, which is a win. But also there's possibility to heal patients beforehand. I was telling Tiger earlier, um, I'd worked on a project in this space in spine, and chronic low back pain is the it's the largest chronic pain condition in the US, greater than the total joints, the big joints. Um, but you have this huge gap between steroid injections and fusion or arthroplasty. And these patients have to suffer through that. There's years of suffering before they can, get this total joint that, if they had been actually treated, maybe they wouldn't have ever needed it. So um, when I was at Medtronic, we had a product that was just a little squishy spinous process device that went between spinous processes and offloaded the facet joints and the disc. And there's actually a lot of people who got healed. You wouldn't have thought it, but they had rehydration of their disc. Um, if that didn't work, if they were too far gone, at least it bought them like 10 years.
Interesting. Interesting. Tom, do you want to talk about Tom's, I mean, a poster child for early OA?
I don't know if that's good or bad, Tiger. I guess I'm talking this. Yeah, you know what we've come across, we've been on the market 5 years. We passed our 5th year, May 27th. And we've done a series of different types of patients. I think that 25 to 50 or 60-year-old trying to buy them time before that total joint is what we set out to do. But we've had a number of professional athletes, high demand athletes, that have actually gone back to play for a substantial amount of time. One of our early patients, she had her first S4 when she was 34, and she's still playing AVP at age 40. And so it's pretty profound. And we have other stories of 14-year-old pitchers, a baseball pitcher that, instead of having some sort of oats or whatever put in his elbow, the radio kept telling him he's been able to use our product and went back to pitching, is actually pitching in college now. So there's those, but that sweet spot is that, that pickleball player that's 40, 45 and does something and needs something to buy time between when they have that injury and that total. So yeah, we've got a lot of experience in it, but with same way with everybody. We've been running on fumes for a year and a half now, and we can't raise the capital. We have the data, we have contracts, we have all of that. But it's kind of an interesting field because people just don't understand it, and there's really not a dominant player in that for them to kind of hitch their wagon to say, okay, here's where we can go. That it just hasn't been accomplished yet. I guess Varicel would probably be the closest.
And so the challenge for you, Tom, the little guy, is lack of capital, not a big sales force, indications. I don't know. What are the
no, those are good questions. It's capital, and capital yields. That leads you to the bigger sales team and all of that. For us, we have very broad indications. We have some joint specific indications, like for thumb arthritis and so forth. We need more joint specific indications in order for people to be able to say, okay, I'm marking this for the femoral condyle, right? Those are the things we need. That just costs money. I think in our approval for the CMC to get marketing language and support to be able to do that costs like 36 grand for that one joint, right? And you enter into these things, you don't know if you're going to get that indication for that joint. So it's a big expense, for a small company like ours.
So it's capital.
It's all capital.
Yeah, Eminel's got his hand up.
No, I was actually just going to ask the very similar question, Tiger, that, capital's been mentioned several times, but capital's just a tool, right? So, what is it that the capital enables? Is it the fact that, there's parts of the country that are just going unserved because you can't have a sales team in there? Or is it, like you say, indications? It'd be interesting to hear what the, 3 to 5 biggest things that the capital would enable are, and if that's kind of consistent and coherent across, because if you can then get a shared solution for those 3 to 5 areas, then it becomes interesting. But if it's 30 different problems across 10 different companies, then it's it's more difficult to find a shared solution.
I'll speak for us. It's sales, 100%. That's where if we were able to raise the capital, 95% of that go to sales and marketing.
Got it. And then what's the payback on that, Tom? I mean, 6 months, 9 months, 12 months before the sales and marketing money pays for itself.
Because we already have a lot of docs that are out there already in contracts, you're looking at a return on capital probably in 1 year per rep. It might be a little longer for some reps, and you might be cash positive that first year for the stronger reps.
Got it. All right. Who else wants to? So we talked about the young patient that doesn't see all the technologies because they're not on the market or because the surgeon's not familiar with them. One of the things we talked about was when you go, if you have early OA and you go see your surgeon, they may not be familiar with all the technologies that are available in the market. They have a hammer, everything's a nail. If they're a total knee guy, they want to do total knees all day long. This assembly line. So do patients see everything that they need to see or not? I don't know.
Tiger, may I ask a question?
Yeah, please, Raymond.
The premise going into this, and I don't want to rain on your parade, but let me ask this kind of basic question. And it's been said 2 or 3 times that they're too young to get a hip replacement or too young to get a knee replacement. Let's just limit the discussion to just those two. And the assumption is that a hip and a knee only lasts 25 years.
Or less.
Let me explain why you're making that assumption. If the average age that people get a hip or a knee is 60, 65, then the average lifespan of people is from that period of time 15 to 30 years. And so there isn't as much data as that I'm aware of on patients that get joint replacements in their 20s. Now, the reason there isn't is because the incidence is so small. But is it possible that your premise that an early intervention implant design is even needed is not even supported in good science because there isn't data? Now, the unicompartmental knee was intended to be an early intervention design, and there is more data on that with younger patients, and its data isn't all that great, but it could just be the reason is because it's not a great bone, implant to bone fixation. And so it's very specific to that particular. In other words, those last 10 to 15 years. In general, but some do last for 30, 40 years. And so it's a really hard starting point because even the premise, I don't think are working with using good information or necessarily good scientific information. On the other hand, I do agree there are other kinds of treatments that people probably aren't getting funding for because of financial reasons. But that's typical, and nobody's mentioned the reimbursement topic either. And you always want to start with, is there a reimbursement code? So I do see that there's a problem, but I don't know if I would lump all joint replacements that are going into older patients couldn't necessarily work just as well in patients that are younger. That's my only point.
No, good. Now, I'm going to ask Patrick to pull up a chart that he showed me yesterday. It's fascinating because it's the percentage of revisions based on the age at which you got your implant. So let's see if we can make this bigger. Can everybody
Okay.
see? Yeah.
So this is from, everybody can see this, right?
Yeah.
Okay.
Yes.
So this is from, and this is knees. So I haven't looked or seen one for hips, but I have to assume if they keep this data on knees, they keep it for hips as well. This is from the UK Joint Replacement Registry. They've got 1.4 million patients under study right now. And they bracket or they follow people. One of the ways that they follow people is by categorizing them by the age at which they receive their primary total knee replacement. So those are all reflected in these different colors. And you can pick any interval you want, including, or most importantly, the age intervals where everybody should be doing good, right? Everybody should be doing fine at 3 years. Everybody should be doing fine at 5 years, so on and so on. But if you just pick, this is men on the left and women on the right. If you just pick 5 years, for example, and then look straight up, this is cumulative revisions on the side. And there's a number of reasons for this. I would be the first to admit that. Like it's multifactorial for sure why someone gets a revision. But 55-year-olds are doing worse at 5 years than 60-year-olds, who are doing worse than 65-year-olds, who are doing worse than 70-year-olds, who are doing worse than 75-year-olds, and so on and so on and so on. So the younger someone is who gets it's obvious that the younger you are when you receive a primary joint replacement, the more likely you are to receive a revision at any time in your life. That's obvious because you just have so many more years left. But what's not sort of maybe obvious, but does show up in the UK Joint Replacement Registry is that you have a higher likelihood of getting revised in the time that you shouldn't be getting revised just because of the age at which you receive your primary total knee in this case. So this is not, the black lines down here. These are people who are 80 plus when they receive their primary, they're sort of dying out of follow-up. But the young patients, every 5-year age bracket that they follow, the younger you are when you receive your primary total knee, the worse off that the more likelihood you are to be revised basically from the day you sort of wheel yourself out of surgery.
Okay. Thank you. That's very helpful. I assume somewhere in there they talk about the statistics because obviously there's going to be fewer, but if it's a 1.2 million or whatever group in the registry, I would hope that the statistics would support that. But it does seem that's an excellent graph. Thanks.
Yeah, it kind of shows the issue. Go ahead, Blake.
Yeah. Hey, everybody. Tiger, are regenerative companies involved in this idea that you're having? Because, my experience when I ran sales for lipogems, and then COVID hit, that's a hell of a product. And it can delay, and we've seen it delay, if not permanently delay knee replacement. And they're actually doing a study right now to treat knee OA. And I think if that gets done, they're going to get CPT codes and it'll get reimbursed. Right now it's all cash, but it's a product that really works in an adipose derived treatment, and the fat does create kind of a cushioning in the knee joint. And they've seen some really good success with that. So I was just wondering how much biologics come into play because, I think they have a role here.
Yeah. No, I agree. I mean, cell therapy is it's in the tent of target companies, but this is just a thought exercise. We haven't, obviously there's no business yet. We haven't picked any companies out, but it's interesting. I think we would need a collection of different types of technologies at different ages. I love cell stuff if it works. But go ahead, Brad and Eminol are up. I don't want to talk.
Yeah, Patrick, I love that slide that you showed from the UK registry, and those data absolutely exist for hip too, and it's consistent across the board. The younger that you have joint replacements, the more trouble you're going to have later in life. I mean, that's shown over and over again. And I think the long-term revision rate, the last time I looked at the data, is 30% for patients under 55 for joint replacements. That's including knee and hip. And I just don't think we should be satisfied with that. I mean, 30% failure rate is just not a good number that we should be satisfied with. And that's one part of the equation. But I think the other part is when you talk to these younger patients that have a total knee replacement or have a total hip replacement, they are not satisfied with that procedure. there's so many activity limitations on them. They can't do high impact activities. They can't do that. They don't have the movement they have, and every impact and every activity that's more than they should be doing, that compromises the life of that implant. So they're always in this state of limbo. Do I do that high impact activity because I want to, because that's life, or do I forego that activity to buy more longevity from my implant? And if you're 38 or 40, that kind of sucks as a proposition of how to live your life. But that's the reality of those patients right now. And they go see the doc, and they literally get PT for many years and ibuprofen without any real solutions offered to them. And I know this because we hear from those patients day in and day out looking for alternative solutions.
Interesting. Eminal.
Yeah, well, got a comment on that first, and then a question. Obviously follow the UK data pretty closely, being from the UK, and it is fascinating when you see that. I think patients are maybe overstating it slightly, but kind of missold. We'll replace your knee and you can return back to whatever you were doing before. Only you kind of can't, because we do know from the research that we've done that if you increase the level of activity, there's a higher increase of metal ion release and all the associated problems that we're kind of investigating. And we're now seeing in our data very, very direct relationships between metal ion levels and joint performance levels. And it's clear outcome scores now. So that's one thing. I think there's a misselling of what the joint replacement will do for you at a younger age, where maybe a conservative approach to push things out a bit longer. And I've got a buddy who's a very, very good runner, and he has, he's trying his best to avoid going under the knife with all kinds of injections. And he's about 5 years in now, and he's still fighting the good fight until he eventually has to kind of succumb. So that was just one comment. But I guess my second one is a question: is it about the scientific discussion of what therapies are appropriate for this idea? Or is it about what is the business model that would support a group of companies, coming together, like in terms of kind of shared resourcing? And sorry, you might have already answered that. I got kicked out of the conversation for about 5 minutes. My internet dropped.
Okay. So I think we're talking business model.
Right.
Yeah. In the article I wrote is a straw man. There's about 25 companies and lipogens should be added to the list. Yeah, so I think the question is the need out there, and could serious money get behind this private equity group, or maybe we do a CPAC where basically do an IPO before there's a company and then try to roll up. The other idea would be, we're getting into the weeds here, but the other idea was take one of the publicly owned companies like Anika or Bioventus and have them, dilute themselves and issue a bunch of shares, and they would be the anchor to try to roll up 3 or 4 companies.
Is there an alternate approach that says you try and do a similar thing but through a different model? So is there a
Oh, you're freezing. That Eminol's freezing. Oh no.
While he's coming back, I think the business case and the clinical case, they kind of work hand in hand. And a big reason for that, this is US centric, of course, but the way that US surgeons have chosen to organize themselves, meaning sort of like what are the different fellowships available and what sort of subspecialties exist, that's a big reason for, I think, like why we as an industry have gotten here so far. I'll speak because I can speak the best about the knee, at least. Most of these types of therapies that are in discussion or in this discussion, they mostly fall within the sports surgeons, like sort of, remit. The sports surgeons have these very complicated or complex and maybe correct algorithms. If you go to like sports meetings and they'll start talking about like how to deal with the aging knee, they will bring up like an enormous like org chart basically, or flow chart of like different age categories, different cartilage damage, all sorts of different profiles. And they love the fact that they have, or what they think they have are, like, you hear this like in the toolbox, lots of things in the toolbox. They seem to want lots of different options. The joint replacement surgeons think of themselves as like, I exist as the point of me is the last stop on the station. Like, everyone's on this train, and when it gets to this point, they hit me, and I'm the last person, and people should see me for one surgery, and that's it. But when you go to the sports surgeon, my experience at least is like, they like having, oh, are you 38 and have blonde hair? Well, we would treat you differently than if you're 39 and have brown hair. These types of all of these sort of like micro categorizations, and that's really problematic for industry. That's problematic. It might be correct clinically, but it's problematic for industry, especially for people that are dealing with class 3 products, because the surgeons want to, that's before you even start writing your protocols and stuff and have all these inclusion and exclusion criteria. The surgeons like want to put you in this like super tight little box where you're only appropriate for this. And that's where I think it makes more sense if you have other companies that are sort of bundled together, where the surgeon does, they can think about a company, and then they can sort of go down avenue A, B, C, D, or E with a number of different things, because otherwise it's just very messy, and sort of the CROs make out and nobody else does in the whole scheme of things.
Well, yeah, Patrick and I talked yesterday about the U.S. surgeons go down the total joint route or the sports medicine route, and then that's all they see. Every time they see a patient, it's a candidate for whatever they do. Whereas the European surgeons are knee surgeons. They do everything in the world in knees.
And these middle of the road patients, there's no set like way that they flow through the referral network. It's different on the north side of some city than it is on the south side of some city, where these sort of like in between patients, like where they, whose care they end up in. And obviously the sort of end treatment can be very, very different.
Yeah, so it feels like there's a need for this, and from the patients need it. They don't necessarily know they need it a lot of times, and surgeons need it. They don't know what's available out there. They're hawking 2 or 3 products in general. And there's a need from a business. I wish Colleen had joined us today, but there's a need from a business financing model. It seems like all these little companies in the regenerative preservation space need more capital. And so that's the idea. Why can't we raise a bunch of money, roll up, and create a consortium of treatment options that we could throw more sales and marketing money at it. We could finance some of these companies through their clinical trials better. It just makes sense to me. You could either do a public offering on the front end. You could take one of the public companies and leverage their stock to buy other things. The third idea that I was talking to Patrick about yesterday, let me try to wrap your head around this. What if JointSave was a company that all it was a marketing company? It was a marketing to patients company. No implants, no FDA, nothing. All we did was just we had websites and Instagram and Facebook, and we just pound the message out every day. Are you a candidate for a hip or knee or spine fusion? Maybe there's a better offer. Are you below this age? Do you know about all the opportunities? And create a kind of a concierge service where we will coach the patient. Hey, the doctor you're seeing just wants to do total knees, but there's a guy down the street that's got, subchondral solutions, implants. Maybe you ought to talk to him. And anyway, it would be a fee. It would be a marketing to service to patients, and they would pay out of pocket, and we would help patients in their little journey figuring out what surgeon to go to. Anyway, that's the third model that I can think of. And I think people would pay. I mean, I just ran into this startup called Kenomatic, and they offer a concierge service. Basically, patients pay out of pocket to get more implant solutions from their surgeon. And it's a fascinating model, and they're growing like crazy. There's just a lot of wealthy people that I don't want to go the normal run-of-the-mill hip or knee. I want more options. I want my surgeon to have more options. I want my surgeon to do more planning. But anyway, I'm going to shut up now. But it seems like that's the third model. One is raise money on the front end. Another one is just convince a private equity group to pull this together. Another one is use an Anika or Bioventus to leverage their stock. And the fourth one is let's just turn it into a marketing company, a marketing concierge service that patients pay out of pocket to see treatments they normally wouldn't see.
Yeah, I think also too, Tiger, if you look at the economic view of this, the Zimmer Biomets and the Strykers of the world have lobbyists making sure that, total joints are sold. They're going to do everything they can to squash anybody who's in joint preservation. That's why you don't see them doing anything in joint preservation. They don't, it's like Philip Morris trying to tell everyone to stop smoking. It's not going to happen. Right. So I think that's a big gorilla you're going to fight with this.
Yeah.
So that being said, I think maybe, in my opinion, it's better off more patient awareness, patient education. Like, look, there's a lot of options out there that you don't know about because a lot of these companies don't have, the bandwidth to get to get to patients, and the big ortho companies don't want you to know about them.
I use the term joint replacement industrial complex.
So that's just a thought. I think that, if it got big, it's a big enough burr in the saddle for these companies. They don't want this.
No, they don't want it. That's why you need, if you're going to do it, you need scale. You need capital and scale.
I don't think the marketing side of things, speaking for our company, is the challenge. I don't think digital marketing is particularly complex. I think you can do it in a very targeted fashion. There are certain channels that are obviously a lot more expensive than others. For us, kind of looking at supporting the marketplace, it's headcount driven. It's good salespeople that can get in front of a customer and have a face-to-face conversation and drive that through to a decision which results in usage. That part for me, as a small company with a couple of products, the affordability of a sales team is a huge challenge. Whereas, digital marketing is relatively affordable in comparison to, folks, out and about knocking on doors.
Yep. So are you a proponent for direct to consumer then and just go around the sales? Yep.
I don't think it's an either or.
Okay.
I think it's a both. I think in a multi-channel strategy, both. There's a huge benefit of both, but I think direct to consumer and helping consumers understand what's out there is massively beneficial because there's very few ways to disrupt. I think, as Patrick called it, the industrial complex. But if you can get people going in and saying, "Hey, I heard about product X, do you know about it?" That is one way to at least for the patient to have a conversation about it.
Interesting. Cope's got a hand up.
I was just going to echo what Emmanuel was saying. Like, you can push surgeons or doctors into the future, or you can have patients pull them into it. And I look, I was in pharma. I watched doctors when that all started, and doctors were irritated a little bit about it to start. And I don't know if you've noticed, it hasn't stopped. I got people dancing on my TV every weekend telling me about some drug they're on, right? I don't know. We were talking about the gorilla. Get a bigger gorilla then. I would say make it a marketing company and go talk to big employers and say, hey, this is one of your biggest things you're going to be paying for your insurance. We can help you manage it, and we can be more cost effective, and we're not beholden to the industrial complex of joint replacement. I love that term, Patrick. That is a great term. I love it. Yeah, I don't know. You got. I'm an old spine guy. I'm just listening to this because I find this stuff fascinating about how the market works in joints. Yeah. So.
It's more than joints, but
Another reason I think an idea like this, or some version of something like this, it would work is that um, at least in the knee, all of these class three or most of these class three devices, they require randomized control. I mean, they die because or they struggle with getting funding. They struggle with getting funding because it's a class three device. Because it's a class three device, it's going to require a randomized control trial. FDA will likely mandate a certain trial of a certain size. Those are expensive and time consuming, multi-year follow-up on top. That's after your last patient is enrolled. Then you have to wait a couple of years typically to follow that last patient all the way through. But FDA is also very like, they tend to mandate that these trials all follow a pretty similar sort of structure and pattern. And FDA thinks that microfracture, basically for anything before a total knee, that the standard of care is physical therapy, microfracture, then total knee. And it's like there's nothing in between. We all know that that's not true, but so many doctors do so much microfracture and bill for it still just because they're in there doing knee scopes and they just sort of do it and then bill for it. So FDA sees hundreds of thousands of microfracture surgeries done every year. And then you go to sports medicine meetings and all the guys on the podium talk about how microfracture is a surgery nobody does anymore. And there's a total like disconnect between that and what if I was in charge of this fictitious company, what I would do is I would fund a separate microfracture study, but to FDA standards. There's tons of microfracture sort of like literature out there, but none of it meets the standards that FDA wants these randomized trials done at. I would fund a separate microfracture study by itself in just microfracture. Find a couple doctors who are very enthusiastic about just doing just microfracture, and then you can license that out to 5 different companies who all want that same exact data because they're all needing that same data. Then you don't have to run a randomized trial because FDA does accept like literature control groups as long as they're done to the same cohort, same inclusion and exclusion criteria, same patient age, same all of those types of things. But getting doctors to agree to participate in randomized trials is a tricky thing, oftentimes because the patients don't want the control group, at least in the knee. The patients they're all happy to sign up for the fancy new technology, but they don't want the control group, especially when the doctors think the control group is the surgery of 25 years ago. They think, well, I'll just do whatever I'm going to do anyways. That would be better than that. But as long as FDA is going to require microfracture as a control group for so many of these studies, it would benefit. It's probably a worthwhile project on its own for somebody to just fund a microfracture study and then just lease it out to whomever wants you. You can base your pivotal off of the same criteria, which FDA largely sort of pulls something off the shelf anyways and just hands to companies.
That's a really good point. Every cartilage study has a microfracture comparison, and it's usually historical, and it never matches. It's apples and oranges, and it never matches what you're doing. And Brad, did you have any? Do they do microfracture in the hip? I mean, it's hard to get to.
They do on occasion. They do more osteochondral allografting in the hip than they do microfracture. Microfracture has a terrible track record in the hip when it's been tried for larger scale lesions. So an osteochondral grafting has about a 20% failure rate in the hip, so that's not great either. So they do a lot of work outside the joint as a result with the acetabuloplasties and the femoroplasties and the labral reconstructions. But when it comes to the cartilage damage in the joint, I think I mentioned this last week, it's kind of benign neglect. It's like I don't have anything for it, so I'm gonna just hope for the best.
An allograft is a horrible. If you're a study sponsor, that's a horrible control group. Like you have to fund that. It's expensive. The timing is unpredictable.
Yeah, I mean, you could wait 6 months and spend tens of thousands of dollars for this graft that the surgeon has to spend an hour on the back table carving it to get it to the right shape. And even then, if you don't get that shape right, there's been studies that show a mismatch in that shape cause problems too. So it's it's a bad situation.
Yeah, Raymond.
Well, first, I commend you, Tiger, for the thought exercise, and it's a good example of how you like to think out of the box because this is definitely paradigm shifting. So great. And I guess what's resonating in my mind is there's the industrial complex that's a opposition to this, that you guys have used that term. Oftentimes, when you start a company, you want to align with surgeons. And so I wonder if you've given any thought, or what do you think would happen if you present this idea to the board or the president of the AAOS and the board and or president of NAS, and present it in a really, really high level, as opposed to nitty gritty in terms of detail or technology, but just philosophically, do those, and maybe there are other organizations, do those organizations have a appetite? Because they will either make or break you, as will the FDA, as will insurance or reimbursements and so forth. But if you had key opinion leading organizations, at first I was going to say a very prominent, highly respected hospital system, and the one that frequently comes to mind is HSS, and they may actually be very interested to create such a visionary plan. So that's my input. And again, good job. I don't, I commend you if you really are going to bring this over the finish line. That would be a lot of work, but it's a great thought exercise.
You know, another a quick thought I had, Tiger, a few years ago, a bunch of sports guys kind of got together and created kind of a society on regenerative medicine, because there's so much out there. There's so much misinformation out there. No one really knows platelet rich, platelet poor. The doctors don't really know the difference. And then you've got, you know, this quote unquote stem cell, and you've got adipose, and you got PRP, and you know, all these other crazy placental products that are coming through. And so these guys all formed kind of a consortium of surgeons, and they meet every year, I think at one of the sports meetings. But it would be, maybe you do something like that where you get a bunch of probably sports guys, because the joint guys are going to put a joint in you. But the sports guys are trained more to preserve the joint and to get, you know, you follow some kind of algorithm, however they were trained, right? So maybe you get some of those guys together, and they're the voice. They're the voice of reason for joint preservation, however that looks, but just a thought.
Well, actually, I was going to mention is, hi, it's Eric. Hey, Blake. Yeah, that's the Biologics Association. It's the end of the ANA meeting, either the end or the beginning of the ANA meeting. So they all get together. And like Brian Cole is one of the founders of it. There's a few guys that are in that. And that's exactly what they're talking about, is trying to, you know, it's kind of the wild, wild west on regenerative medicine out there. And they're trying to put together some standards. And they've got backing from many of the other associations other than the Academy. So
ICRS has tried this a little bit too. If you look at their, like, go to their website, they changed their name officially, at least, or on their website. It's like International Society of, or International Cartilage Restoration Society and Joint Preservation or something like that. They threw it on the end. But if you go to an ICRS meeting, I'm not going this year, I was there at the last one. It's basically here's our results of osteochondral allograft meeting. Like, it's the same 10 guys that give versions of the same paper, like over and over and over and over again. And then the panels are like, you know, how do you revise these? Or, you know, what's your algorithm look like on this specific type of patient? It's like, it really gets like super, super repetitive.
Yeah. Or what happened with PRP with this patient population. Right?
Yeah. So I think they see the need, right? To Blake's point, I think they recognize, like, or enough of the surgeons recognize that there's a space, and there's room for a society to take some ownership, leadership, whatever. It just needs to be pushed on and kind of evolved. The next couple chapters need to be written.
Yeah.
But some of this is recognized, I think, by some of the big ortho, right? Is like a friend of mine up in Albany area. He charges the sports for Zimmer, and Gel One's a big seller for them. So I don't think they completely ignore it. I still, you are correct. That's it's cordoned off for just the sports folks. And I hear from sports friends, and they're like, yeah, if they happen to see my partner that does nothing but knee, they're getting a knee. If they see me, perhaps I might be able to do this XYZ, but it's somewhat within maybe down to the practice level on how the patients are referred throughout that practice and their system, and the referral people that titrate and bring them down to what surgeon
Yeah.
or physician.
I think that they do agree. I would agree with that point. I think they do recognize, like, I don't think if like someone at corporate development at Zimmer was like on this call, I don't think he'd be like, no, you're wrong. There's no space for these types of things. I don't think that they would say that. They have tuned their business, at least this is my opinion. Like, they have tuned their businesses though, that like they're going to let everyone else sort of overspend to get like a commercial ramp going, and then they'll overpay, like, at 20 million or whatever of revenue. And for these companies, when you have to run a 50 million, for enough of these companies, when you have to run a $50 million trial to then raise more money to then get to 20 million in sales, like, enough of them just like sort of don't make it along the way. That's how I view it.
Yeah, Patrick, that's absolutely right. I mean, they recognize the value, and they recognize the underserved patient population. They just play the waiting game. They want to wait you out to see who can get something to market, and then when you get there, they have deep enough pockets for 250
Yeah.
million, $350 million acquisition. But my contention is there's not that many companies that'll make it that far.
Correct. There's so many that die along the way that are good
That's the
technologies that,
problem.
yeah.
If they really, and I don't want to be careful here because I know that they're trying to do the best they can, but if they could put some funds early on to help some companies, then there's a lot more companies that could get there. But they show no appetite for doing that at all. So that brings us full circle back to this idea of how do you get these companies to market, and how do you fund them?
That is really surprising coming from pharma. I was a senior leader at Pfizer for a good while, and we would look around and we'd place bets on small companies. We take a small stake with right of first refusal, and if the data kept, they look good, we take a bigger stake and a bigger stake, and then eventually the company would be bought. And Pfizer, by the time I left, was essentially a bank that just bought smaller companies and then marketed it. Doesn't really do innovation itself anymore, and it surprises me that I'm not, I'm still relatively new on the orthopedic side of things. It surprises me that no one is doing that kind of same model of kind of multiple small bets across multiple smaller companies, with then the kind of the right of first refusal to buy in. The innovation doesn't seem to be working that way here yet.
Yeah, I'd love to see them adopt that kind of model, but I think it's on us in some ways, the guys who are doing the innovation. There needs to be more successes in this area, and if you get some exits and there's some noise in the joint preservation space and the joint restoration space, then I think it'll help all of us to get more funding and get their attention. But it's almost like we have to prove it first.
Yep. Raymond?
Just real quick. So I attended the LSI MedTech meeting, and I'm not at all an expert at fundraising and all that. But what I did gather is there is a group of investors that are looking for stuff like this. I mean, this is a visionary, change the world kind of stuff. Generally, the family offices, it seems, because what is important to them is they are trying to change the world to make the world a better place. At least that's what they say, as opposed to the private equity and so forth. So you might go down that path, and perhaps I don't know, Bill Gates, he's trying to give away his money. This might resonate with him. And if you were to pitch it now, on the flip side, now I'm going to put myself in the shoes of a startup company, and that's not the situation in my case that has an early intervention implant. That's not my situation. But if I were to be in that situation, the first question that I would ask is, well, how do you value my contribution in my technology fairly against this roll up? And how will I get a fair return, or am I carrying a bunch of dead weight with some of the other technologies that aren't as good? So that's the 2 points. There might be money in family offices, and number two, there might the issue of getting a bunch of disparate people to get along and agree. That's a hard task.
Well, you'd have to have a leader that would, like a PE group, that could just take charge and fire people and change, equity plans, and you'd have to just really take charge. And the companies that are doing well would have leverage. The companies that are not doing well and suffering would have less voice, less leverage. I don't know what it looks like, but it wouldn't be pretty. I mean, it's not.
Yeah.
I
I
mean,
think I think there's a clear question for companies that want to do it, which is compared to what?
Yeah.
Yeah, you might only get 25% of, time in the bag, or you might get, fourth position slot. But if it's fourth position slot in a team of 50 reps across the country, plus marketing time, plus, how does that compare to what you got currently?
Yeah.
Chances are
Agreed.
it's a load better to what you currently have. So I think it'll require sensible leaders who will be happy to make a trade-off with it's better than the status quo.
Right.
this journey started way back in 2010 with me. I joined Active Implants, and we had a meniscus replacement to basically delay total knees. It just slid in the medial compartment and spread out all the stresses again, and the arthritis pain went away right after surgery, and it never got approved in the US, but it got approved in Europe. And we were courting Zimmer big time to invest in us. And we found out after the fact, they did not want to invest in Active Implants because they thought it was a threat to their biologics business. Period. I mean, they were working on cartilage therapies, and we had a meniscus replacement that didn't, basically bumped into their cartilage replacement. So I really think there's going to be a lot of pushback from the big joint people, maybe some of the big sports medicine companies. I mean, there's a need. There's a need for patients. There's a need for the little companies. There's a need for surgeons that don't have access to everything. I mean, I just think there's so much pull for this idea. It's just a matter of mechanics. Who can make this? Who can tell the story, raise the money? Kind of lead this whole thing.
The structure of the sports marketplace probably plays a role into this as well. Arthrex is so dominant in sports. I don't know exact market shares, and what products you put in there would matter in terms of how you figured it out. But like, there's such a gap in my mind, at least from what I see, and like between Arthrex and everybody else, that they can kind of do what they want and really set the tone in a way that's harder in joint replacements, because at least you have 3 or 4 companies that if somebody makes a move, the others will start looking to copy, or be aware of it. It's the way that the sports market has evolved over time. I'm just sort of thinking out loud. That probably plays a role in this too.
Patrick, can I ask you a question on this? I really value your opinion on it. Most marketplaces have like a dominant 1-2. Yeah, if there's one big player, do you think that makes it maybe even a more acceptable idea to people who don't like the fact that there's only like a one kind of single choice? Or do you think that your surgeons are kind of so comfortable with that they don't want it upsetting?
I mean, there's definitely a lot of sports surgeons out there. I mean, every young sports surgeon comes out of fellowship and thinks like, I'm going to be the next big deal for Arthrex. Like 100% of them seem to. I hope this recording doesn't make it much further than this group, but they all sort of seem to, until they get to be 45 and realize like that's very, the odds of that happening are pretty small. I just see, especially in joint replacement where everything is 510K heavy and you can sort of iterate on everything and copy on everything. There is a copycat sentiment where as soon as somebody does something, everyone else will immediately, they're all watching each other, of course, really closely. And if somebody, sort of gets bought, it causes the other ones to, oh, wait, should we be doing that? Should we be looking into that? What are the other companies out there that we should be watching? Whereas in sports, like if Arthrex does something, other people look and take notice. But if they don't do something and somebody else much smaller does something, Arthrex may not even care because they just, for whatever reason, priorities, whatever, they just sort of nobody's big, no one's singularly big enough to sort of really, really threaten them. And I think that plays a role in this there's not a lot of entities that can write like really, really big acquisition checks in the sports marketplace. I mean, the other Stryker has a sports division, J&J has a sports division. They tend not to put those types of acquisition prices towards things in those business units. So,
got it. Thank you.
Interesting.
You know, Arthrex has joints now, which I'm not sure how that's going. I hear not well, but
yeah, I don't even know if they sell the hip and knee anymore or the total hip and knee. I kind of thought, I mean, they have a shoulder replacement for sure, which makes sense because they're because sports surgeons do those.
yeah, they've had that forever. They've had a uni
Yeah.
for a long time, but
Yeah.
and I think another factor is a lot of the little guys. Arthrex will just copy what they have. They'll reverse engineer it and say, "Sue me." They don't care. Maybe
Yeah.
it's not. They're not buying companies like Pfizer's doing. They're just copying them and saying, "Sue me. We'll see in court." We got a lot deeper pockets than you do, and most of these companies can't afford. They just can't afford to sue them. So I think that's a little bit of a barrier to entry too. And it's hard to get recognition and get scale and get scope when you're battling that Arthrex, Smith Nephew. Those are really the two big ones in my opinion.
So Tiger, I'm guessing nobody from a private equity firm reached out to you today and said,
Not yet.
They're waiting for this recording, Brad. They're lined up. They're ready to go at 3:01 or 4:01.
I mean, if somebody, if what this needs is somebody to lead JointSave, basically write up a business model and start pitching it. And
I think there's a step before that, Tiger. I think it'd be really interesting to find a couple of friendly PEs and talk them through the concept and just get some feedback.
Yeah, or some PEs that are more amenable to earlier stage companies, and most of them the late stage. It's they wouldn't even consider it.
Yeah,
this might be more VC than PE.
Yeah, and VCs are sitting on their wallets right now. They're not doing this. The shining point of all this is the looks like the IPO market's going to open up later this year, early next year. And if this JointSave thing was a consortium, they got rolled up, there's probably a really good chance you could spin it out publicly in 2 or 3 years and just make a ton of money. But because I think that exit's going to be available in 2 or 3 years. But right now, you'd be bleeding money for 3 years, which Ps don't like to do. Ps, they use the cash flow every month to pay for the loan on what they just bought, so they.
I think it's too early for PE.
Yeah, too early for Ps. Maybe ventures sitting on their wallets. I mean, these SPACs are coming back, now. Maybe, I don't know if anybody's done SPAC in medical devices, but maybe somebody could pull that off. Or a giant family wealth, office. And the low cost way to do this is what option number 4 that I said, where you just turn it into a marketing service company. And, you say, you pay us $1,000 and we'll help you with your algorithm on your knee or your hip or whatever. And, we're not offering medical advice. You're gonna have to figure all that out. But, hey, if you want a Cytex Ortho, you want to be in the Cytex Ortho clinical trial, you just go to this city. You're a candidate. I mean, I think patients would really benefit from it. We would just help them with their algorithm, basically. I like the way Patrick said that.
And I can't say too, Tiger, to that point. I mean, there's a lot of misunderstanding out there from a patient perspective when their joints start going bad. I mean, they don't get good advice, they don't get full information, and they're led to believe that a total joint replacement is the answer, and you just have to wait until you're old enough to get it. And that's just, I don't like it, but they just don't. They're not fully disclosed to when they go see the doc on these things, and why that is, I don't know. But it's the information I get back from the patients when they tell me what they've been told. It's just like you were given about 20% of the information you needed to make a decision.
Wow. Yeah, I mean, it's the hammer and the nail thing. If you if you're doing 6 total knees a day, everything looks like a total knee to you. Everything that walks in the office.
Yeah, and that makes sense.
Yeah. Well, this has been great. We'll have to do another version. Maybe we'll get some finance people on. Nobody wants to raise their hand and take this on yet, but we'll keep chewing on it. The thought exercise. Maybe the next step is to. What do you guys think the next steps are? Find a finance person or?
You know what would be interesting, Tiger, is Al Nani was on last week, and Al's tight with the Parvizi group,
Hmm.
right? And so they've formed their own fund,
Yep.
and we might be able to get a couple of surgeons, but also that are part of one of the funds. So that might be interesting. So Al might be able to set that up.
Okay, that's a good one. Yeah,
It's a
I'll
good
reach
thought.
out.
Tiger, how about getting some sports med surgeons and get their feedback?
Yes, I'm open to anything. I think I'm sort of down on surgeons these days. If you ask a surgeon, would you like to have, some extra options to treat patients? They're just going to say yes all day long. I've never heard, yeah, I'll take a look at that. Yeah, when it's commercially available, show it to me. Yeah, I may be interested in that.
And is it approved in my system?
There you go. There you go. Now, yeah. And then you got to go through the VACs. But surgeons want everything. I've never had a surgeon say, I want less options. And so I think we get lied to by surgeons all the time because they want everything. They want everything available. They want the whole revision system in the hallway just in case they need it. They want everything. So I think the way to do this is patient demand and find the right finance people that can embrace the vision and write a big check. And then a leader that can pull it all together. But I don't know, it's early.
Yeah, I think the surgeons would be more motivated by hearing, here's the things you haven't had access to over the years because they've died on the vine because of lack of funding or whatever. The that sort of that hits home for them rather than like if it's like, would you like this? Yes, because Tiger's right, they'll say yes to everything. But if you
They don't know what they haven't had access to, probably. I remember in the early days, I used to go to Academy, and all the international surgeons would come to the booth at Academy and go, "Well, we can't get that in our company. We can't get that in our country. We can't." And they would see all the things they couldn't get. It would just frustrate them. Interesting. All right. Well, thanks, guys. We're going over the hour. This has been very interesting. Thanks for showing up. And I'm sure we'll do a part 2 of this in the future. Have a good Thursday, Friday. See you next time.
Thanks, Tiger.